Thanks, everybody.
All right, good morning, everybody. We have Backman Title here, and we are just starting the recording, but I have to add a disclaimer because I told Tucker I would, that since this is a recording of a CE class, you need to understand that Tucker's restricted by state rules. It's not, he's a big bully. I mean, he is, but that's not why. He can't give you CE credit for this if you're watching the recording. So don't ask for it from him. Don't ask for it from me. If you're here live, then you need to, if you've just joined recently, there's in the chat, um, there's a roster for credit. Make sure you click that roster, fill everything out, fill out all your details so that you can get CE credit. And with that said, I want to thank you, Tucker and Christine, again for your support. I'll turn the time over to you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Christine Stevens is here with us. She's helping proctor and monitor our class because the state requires us to have a proctor. So she is acting as tribute for us. So thanks, Christine, on that one.
Absolutely.
I wonder how many times she's gonna take this class. That'll be really fun to think about, Christine.
I'll
Okay,
tally how many
yeah,
times.
you should. Like Eric mentioned, like I mentioned, that roster for credit is in the chat. Go ahead and use that as soon as you can or before we end class. Okay, so let's get through a couple basic things. How many of you have already had something about FinCEN? Maybe you've read the emails that have come forward from the UAR. Maybe you've had taken some online training. So we'll just go through some of the basics of what this is first. Now, FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's part of the U.S. Treasury Department, and there have been several states nationwide who are already doing this type of FinCEN reporting. It's new nationwide, but in places like New York and places like back east and some parts of California, they've already been doing this type of reporting. So it's kind of new for us, but it's old hat for this government agency and for title and escrow in those areas. The number one thing to know on this, and it's okay if we get questions about this again, is the buyer is the trigger for FinCEN reporting. Okay. So the buyer entity, or whether or not the buyer is an entity, that will determine whether or not these reports are due or not due. So whether the seller is a trust or a partnership or a corporation, that it doesn't matter what the seller is. It only matters what the buyer is to trigger this report. So as we go through this, we're going to talk about who does the reporting and when reporting happens. And the seller does have to be involved if there is reporting. But again, it's not the seller that triggers, it's the buyer. So there's three main triggers to determine whether or not this FinCEN report will be active. The first one is the property a residential property, or will it be used for residential purposes? Right? Oh, it says I'm not sharing my screen, so let me try that again. Okay, is that showing up at all for folks?
I'm not seeing it.
Boy, oh boy. Okay, let me see if I can.
I don't know if I messed it up. I put a spotlight on you so that we could see you instead of all of us off to the side. Did that just change it for, I just removed that spotlight. Did that change it for everybody? Because I can see his screen. What are you all seeing?
I'm not seeing his screen.
I'm just seeing you, Eric.
Me?
But heck, Eric, you look good.
All right. Now what do you see? Somebody unmute and talk to me.
It's you.
Still you.
All right.
Let me try and share it on my end again.
No,
It's
that
looking
worked.
good now.
Now yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
there we go. Okay,
There we
thanks everybody. I'm glad to not be the focus. That's probably better for everybody's mental health as well. Okay, so starting on this again, this applies to transaction where it's residential property already or property that might become residential. So if it's land being purchased by a developer to become residential, like a 1 to 4 family property, or if it's even going to be mixed use where you have retail on the bottom and a condo or something like that on the top, that means it is a reportable transaction. That's the first trigger. Now, all three of these have to be you have to mark the box for us to have to do reporting, but there's the first one. The second one is it says non-financed. So if it's being purchased with cash or with a non-traditional lender, that means a lender who's not a bank, a credit union, or a mortgage broker. That's our second trigger. And then the third one is the transferee. So the buyer, if the buyer is an entity, anything except for an individual, then those are the three things that can trigger this FinCEN reporting. So a residential non-traditional finance loan where the buyer is an entity, that means the federal government wants to know about what's going on. Now, this makes sense a little bit because when we have a transaction where there is a traditional loan, well, then actually the lender is doing this type of reporting, right? If you go to a credit union or a bank or get an SBA loan, the government already knows about the transaction and who's reporting what. This is just transferring that responsibility to now the title company to report this information from the buyer side transaction. Okay. So here's our next little bit. There are some exemptions to this, like it's not all totally bad, but the other part of this is we're not going to see a lot of these exceptions. Like if it's a transfer on easement or a transfer on death, or it's out of a bankruptcy, or it's to a spouse, or it's part of a 1031 exchange where the buyer is bringing in 1031 money and some of their own money, then those are not reportable. Because if you think about it, the 1031 company is already reporting that to the federal government. Or if the buyer is some sort of regulated industry. So if Backman Title bought a building, we wouldn't have to report because we're already doing reporting because we have an insurance license, right? If Equity Real Estate is a regulated entity, and Eric, you decide to buy the post office in downtown Salt Lake or downtown Ogden again, and if you bought that building, it wouldn't be reportable because you're a regulated entity generally. Okay. There's a couple of FinCEN flow charts. You've probably seen this floating around. I put the one up here from Old Republic. It just goes through your whether or not this is a reportable transaction again. Is it a residential property? Is there institutional lending? Is the property going to be used for residential purposes? And if all those are yes, again, it is a reportable transaction. First American has the same thing. You can find these flow charts pretty much everywhere. I should Backman brand one of these, but I just haven't had much time to do that yet. So who's responsible for reporting these transactions? Once we determine that, yes, this is a thing, the buyer is an entity, it is for residential purposes, and it's a cash deal. Well, FinCEN actually has this, it's called the reporting cascade. And it says who's responsible for doing this report. It gets pretty granular, but the very top one that says closing settlement agent listed on the settlement statement, that's us. The buck stops with the title company. That's it. There's a couple of reporting deadlines for us. So March 1st is when this all began. So Sunday was the first day that we had to do any of these reportings. And basically, we've got 30 days after closing to complete the report, or the latest date is the last day of the month following closing. So if we had a closing right now on March 3rd, we'd actually have until April 30th to do our reporting. Most of the title companies you're going to deal with, though, are not going to wait to do the report. And we'll look at why that is here in a little bit. Even though we have this extended deadline, title companies are going to start to say, and have been saying, we're not going to let you settle and close until the FinCEN report is complete. And we'll look at that. We'll look at that here in a little while. So exactly from a buyer and seller, what information is being collected here? What is it? Well, there's some basic things like property details. You can think of this like the MLS information, right? Once a property shows up as sold, the address and legal, the transaction information. In the FinCEN report, it actually has source of funds for the buyer, like where is this money coming from? And then here's the extra stuff, the entity information for the LLC or corporation, and also for the trust that we'll look at. It also collects information about the person signing the form in behalf of those parties. So their name and date of birth and things like that. We'll look at some of the specific forms here in a few minutes, but there's a lot of information being collected by the federal government that the title company now has to make sure is collected. So don't hate on the title companies. It's not our fault. We do have to follow this, but we didn't right? This law, we have to abide by the law, right? That's the main thing. Um, Defining beneficial owners. So it gets down to this level. Let's say that you are a minority interest holder in an LLC, like you own 25%, and then somebody else owns 75%. Well, technically, that means if you own 25% or more of an entity, then you do have to report. Okay. If you're a beneficiary under a trust, then you also have to report. They have to collect information about you. So if you've got six kids, mom and dad are the trustors, the settlers. They created their family trust back in the day, and they have six kids. Each of those six kids may be on this Fincen report for the buyer side transaction and for the seller side transaction. And we'll look at exactly what these these people are going to have to enter in as far as their contact information. Now, it's kind of funny this way because usually when people set up an entity, especially like an LLC, or they set up a family trust, part of the idea behind that is it's going to be private. No one's not going to know what's going on with my LLC. And this is especially true for a family trust, right? A trust is a private document. Okay, it's not shared in the public record the same way LLC managers and members and operating agreements might be shared on a public website. So this is additional reporting that people are not used to getting. Now, when we did this training for Backman, our multiple escrow officers said, "Hey, this is the big deal because we have a hard time even getting someone's family trust when it comes to closing. People don't like to give us their family trust documents. And sometimes we have to say, well, we need this to be able to protect the transaction. This is a step above and beyond. So as a real estate agent, I'm sure you're going to get questions from buyers and sellers that say, hey, I've never had to provide this information before. Why do they care so much about who the beneficiaries of my trust are? Or who are the non-signing members of my corporation who own stock? Or who are the people in this LLC who might have signing authority or actually controlling ability. So this is again more information collected from the government. And the nice thing for us in real estate and then in title and escrow, if somebody completes the report, there's a reasonable reliance standard, meaning we can believe what they tell us. Now that goes so far, well, only so far, because if we know of a red flag, in other words, if we know if someone's lying, we actually have to report that we think their report is inaccurate, and we may have to have them complete the report again, and we'll talk about that again. The federal government says they're only going to keep the information that is filed in the report for a period of 5 years. So apparently after 5 years, someone's hitting the delete button on all the information that has been collected. How that works, I don't know. It's behind the federal government curtain, but that's some of the idea behind this is the Fed say, don't worry about it. We're only holding on to this for 5 years. Okay. Okay. Let's look at the information that's collected. So ALTA, the American Land Title Association, came out with some forms that said, hey, title companies, if you're going to be doing this information collection on your own, here's some sample forms that you need to fill in. I think there's 121 entries, or this is a form with 121 entries in it. And each of the 121 entries needs to have a response. So it's a pretty robust reporting, and it's a fairly robust form. You probably don't want to do this at the closing table. Okay, this is again something that needs to happen pre-closing, hopefully within the buyer diligence period or the seller disclosure period on the REPC. That's when this should be completed. So here's our first bit of information. This is someone like Backman will fill this out, like an escrow officer. Here's the transaction details as far as here's the address. Okay, here's the settlement date, here's the sales price, and here's our information, our federal information as a title company, right? REIN number. Okay, the person completing the form, the buyer or the seller, needs to fill in this. Okay, it says, what's your full name? What is your physical address? It can't be a PO box. What is your phone number? What is your email? What's your relationship to the seller entity? Oh, sorry, the buyer entity. Is this an LLC? Are you the owner? Are you an accountant? Are you the real estate agent? Real estate agents don't fill out this form, by the way. You don't you do it. If this is part of a trust, who are you? Are you the trustee, the beneficiary? Are you an accountant or an attorney? Okay. The next thing that goes through and make sure that this is a reportable transaction. So even though the title company says this is reportable, and even though we send the form out for people to sign, they still have to certify that this is a reportable transaction. So it goes through those trigger questions. Is this a residential property? Okay. Is this an entity that requires reporting? And what is the property going to be used for? It also asks that questions about family trusts. Okay, here's the transferee, the buyer information if it's an entity. Okay, it says unique ID. If you've already set up an LLC, and a lot of real estate agents have, a lot of agents do not have an EIN yet. It's probably a better idea for you to get an EIN if you're going to be purchasing or selling real property, because if not, then your social security number goes in this box as the reporting entity. And that can be a thing that we need to educate our buyers and sellers on. Hey, if you don't have a federal EIN, you need to get one before this report goes out. It doesn't take very long. It's like a 2-minute deal, but you do need to have one. If it's a trust, it's another question, right? What is your EIN, or what is your federal filing number for the trust? If they don't have an EIN for a family trust, and that's fairly common, especially if the trustees are still alive, excuse me, the settlers are still alive, then they'll likely have to get one. And then look at this information. This is the granularity. This is how specific it gets. What's your full legal name? What's your date of birth? What's your residential street address? Again, not a PO box. Are you a citizen of what country? What's your social security number? And what's your reason for reporting? Is this something you own, or something you control, or something you sign for? Those are the 3 criteria. I own it. I sign for it. Monica asked a question in the chat. Do you feel that this will help cut down on fraudsters trying to sell property that doesn't belong to them? It might. It might, because if the buyer is an LLC, then the seller will have to do reporting. I suppose it could. It could. I don't think that's not the purpose of the rule, but it probably will be a benefit from it, like a side benefit. If it's the same thing, questions about your trust. Is this a revocable trust? What's your unique ID? And then this is where it comes into the trustee or the beneficial interest for a trust. This is where you'd be listing your kids or whoever's going to receive money from that trust, who's a beneficiary. So if imagine mom and dad trying to do this at a closing table, right? Because they forgot to do it before. Is everyone going to know the address of their kids and their kids' social security numbers at the closing table? Probably not. This is something that needs to be prepared for and done, again, prior to settlement. Part 4, this is for the buyer side, where the fund's coming from. And we've heard from our Fincen reporting partner that the amount of the sales price and the amount received are coming through the Fed system. That doesn't have to be exact, but it has to be ballpark. But they are going to have a source of funds on this. Where's your money coming from? And if you remember, like we talked about, in a regular real estate transaction where there's a loan, well, the source of funds is already handled by someone who does a federal report, right? A bank, a credit union, a mortgage broker. This is, again, if there's no one else doing the federal report, this is why there's that source of funds on there. The people who sign this report for the buyers have to certify under penalty of perjury. Again, like, this report is accurate to the best of my knowledge. It's one of those statements. So this is the buyer reporting form. This is the seller reporting form. Again, the title company will go in and import the transaction details. And the seller, it doesn't matter if the seller's a trust, an individual, or an LLC, they still have to complete the information because it's a buyer-triggered event, not a seller-triggered event. So imagine, if you will, you're an innocent seller. Okay, you're an individual, you're a trust, you're an LLC, and everything is hunky-dory, and you've been able to fly under the radar of the federal government for your apartment complex, right? Your duplex or triplex or fourplex. And suddenly you have a buyer an offer come in from a buyer. And as a seller now, you're reporting all of this information to the government as well. Now, if somebody was getting a regular loan or buying the property as an individual, you wouldn't have to fill this out. But because the buyer triggers this, the seller is going to fill out this information. Again, information about who's completing the form, whether or not the transaction is exempt. Okay. If you're an individual, you're filling out 3A. If you're an entity, you're doing 3B. Okay. In other words, here I am. Here's my EIN for my LLC or my corporation. And 3C is for the trust. If it's a trust, once again, you're reporting who are the beneficiaries of this trust. Okay, what's their address? What is their EIN or their social security number? So this is a lot of information that's being collected again, right? 121 form fields. And you have to do this in electronic format. So how many of us have sellers or mom and dad who aren't very good on a computer, or maybe even don't have an email that they use very regularly, or they can't remember the password for their email, right? They only needed it to get into Pinterest or something like that. Well, these forms have to be completed electronically. It has to be an electronic reporting. What if you can't get the information for all the beneficiaries of the trust? What's the solution? Well, you can't close without it, so they got to figure it out. They have to figure it out. Like it's not an option to skip the question, unfortunately. Yeah, sorry, Whitney, that's not a very nice answer, but it's the only answer we have. Okay. There is something called a designation agreement. Like if you're a buyer who's purchasing tons of property all the time, let's say you're a home builder, you can actually have a company or a person designated to fill this information out for you every time. And the title companies and the federal government say, hey, as long as you have the designation agreement, you can rely on it. Right. In these designation agreements, they have a reporting person that's named, and over again, they'll be able to do it. I have a feeling that this will become like workforce service reporting, if any of you have had to do that before. Um, or when you're doing your I-9 for getting a brand new employee, I'm assuming it's going to get easier and easier. But keep in mind, just like with these Fincen reports, the designation agreements are held by the federal government for another 5 years still. Now, why is this a big deal for title companies, and why are we saying things like we can't have a closing until the Fincen reporting is completed? And this is why it's the penalty section. So if a title company misses one of these things, right? It's a negligent violation. We just forgot we were negligent. It's a $1,400 fine per transaction that we miss. If they find a pattern of negligent things, like if we skip it for 2 or 3 people, or maybe we have our favorite real estate client or our favorite developer client who says, I really don't want to do this. If they find a pattern, they can immediately fine, there's no hearing or anything like that, $108,000, almost $109,000. If they find there's a pattern of willful, then it's a criminal fine, and imprisonment of not more than 5 years. And then if there's a big civil penalty for this, the people who are involved, it's either 278,000 or 69,000 per transaction that you skip, whichever is greater. So if you think about how much a title company makes on a transaction, it's less than $1,394, right? It's not worth it to us to allow this to happen. And again, why did they put this on a title company? Well, we see all the paperwork, we see every buyer, and we see every seller. It's kind of a natural thing. This is not a job that we want to have, but it's a job that we do have. It's like the old line from Batman, right? It's not what is it? This isn't the hero that they deserve, but the hero that they want. I don't know how that goes exactly, but it's the same kind of thing. Eric is smiling because I think he knows that by heart. We'll
Not
see
the hero they asked for, but it's the hero they needed.
That's the one. Thank you. You sounded just like Commissioner Gordon right there, right? You did a really good job. Most of the title companies that you're going to see are going to hire a vendor for this. Okay, so Backman is not going to handle the reporting ourselves. One of the reasons is we're not sure we want to handle everyone's personal information through our own systems. So most title companies, again, are going to have a vendor. Ours is called FincenRealEstateReport.com. So your buyers and sellers will get a link to go fill out the forms with this company. And this is what it looks like. Now, if you go there right now, FincenRealEstateReport.com, there's actually some free resources there. Like if you're handling something for a buyer or for a seller and you can't remember what the rules are, if you go to that little section at the top that says free resources, they have a checker. Basically, you answer the question that says, this is a reportable transaction, yes or no. There's videos there for buyers, like training videos. There's videos there for sellers, right? And there's actually videos there for real estate agents about what this means and how to explain it to your clients. It's a pretty great resource. So a couple of the major underwriters, I know Westcor, First American, Old Republic, have all recommended that their agents use this service. So you're probably going to see it, or your buyers and sellers will see it over and over again. Again, but this is the one that Backman is contracted for. So our escrow team will go in, and on this website, we're going to throw in the transaction details. Okay, just like we talked about. What's the property address? We need the buyer and seller emails and the sales price and our file number. Those are the things we need to complete. So this is a thing that happens in title and escrow, and this is sometimes a thing that happens to us. And we're grateful for every order that we get. Don't get me wrong. But a lot of times when an order comes in, we don't have the contact information coming in for the buyer and for the seller. In order for us to complete this report and in order for closing to not be delayed, we need the contact information. We need your help from the agents to get us that information. Buyer, seller contact information, phone number, email address. Okay, those are things that we have to have now. And it's not something we can usually do, 3 weeks after we have the contract and the title commitment's already done. This is probably something that needs to happen as soon as the order comes in. So as a listing agent, when you're ordering your commitments, get us the seller information. As soon as an offer is received, get us the buyer's contact information as well. So this is a concern for people, and it should be. When I looked up, I put into Adobe Stock, I have my Adobe Stock subscription. I put in filing cabinet, and it came up and said vintage filing cabinet. That was the description of these vintage filing cabinets. And lo and behold, if you look behind me, right there, I actually have one of these vintage filing cabinets right behind me. Like I had no idea it was vintage until today. Apparently, I have Does that mean it's worth more money? It's suddenly my vintage four-door filing cabinet is worth extra money. But
it might mean your
yeah,
vintage, Tucker.
I am definitely vintage, right?
That
Definitely
just
vintage.
increases your value, right?
Yeah, like a fine wine, I suppose. Something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly.
If I'm a buyer seller, and this is more as we get into this world when we talk about data security, am I concerned about where my information is held? My personal private information? Well, yeah. Yeah. These third-party services, they have to meet SOC 2 compliance. That means they have to have special security passes that are given to them there's a compliance area there. And the federal government, hopefully, they're going to keep our information secure as well as they're holding it in their system for 5 years. Now, with what's happening in the world, are there any threat actors around here who are committing acts of terrorism and trying to steal personal and private information? Think about who our major players are in that: Iran, Russia, North Korea, all these different things. Question from Joseph. How much money are the title companies going to charge the buyer and seller? That comes down to each individual title companies. At Backman, we're treating it as a pass-through fee. Means it's going to be passed through to one of the parties, whoever we're instructed to charge it to, and the fee for the reporting is $120. Now, if another title company is charging $400, does that mean that they're charging too much? No, they may be doing the reporting themselves, and it takes that long in order for them to file the report, if you look at it from an hourly perspective. Back when Alta came out with these forms, we looked at, hey, should we just do this ourselves? Can we just have the Fincen reporting department? And when we looked at the complexity of the forms and trying to pay somebody and on our team to do that, it just doesn't make financial sense. It's cheaper for us to have this FinCEN real estate report to it for $120 than hire somebody and give them benefits and make sure that the reporting is done correctly. So some title companies are doing it themselves. I think Stewart Title has their own FinCEN reporting platform that they're setting up through their system. They're a nationwide underwriter. They have staff and they have systems to do that within their software. So I don't know what they're going to charge. Is it going to be too much? Probably not, based on the information and liability they have in keeping that information and data. And you might see that information, and you might see that these fees go up. Right now, Backman, it's going to be $120. But what if we find, as our escrow officers give us feedback, like, hey, it's taking me 45 minutes every time or an hour to contact the buyer and seller and make sure they fill out the report. If it's taking more of our time, then we may have to charge more than the $120. But for now, it's a direct pass-through fee. We've already looked at this, but why are title companies requiring this before settlement? Well, one of them, the chief one, is the penalties. The second one is human nature. If you're a seller and you have the option of coming into closing and getting your money and then filling out the Fincen real estate report, you know what a lot of sellers will do? They're just going to take the money and run. There's also these contract implications that we're going to look at here in a little while. What does it say on the REPC as far as deliverables to the title and escrow company? What needs to happen before a settlement and closing can take place? So that these are all things of reasons why the title company is going to say, let's do this before settlement and closing. You're going to start to see these on transactions, on residential transactions where the FinCEN report is due. It's an exception. Excuse me, it's a requirement on the title commitment that the escrow officer complete the FinCEN real estate reporting. In other words, it's just like, hey, pay off this loan, release this deed of debt or this tax lien. It's going to be a requirement for your escrow officers. It's not an insurable risk. This isn't an exception to title. It doesn't create a lien on the property. It's just a title requirement, just like verifying the identity of those signers for an entity. So what can we do to help our clients? Well, if you look at what the real estate purchase contract is and what it does, it just creates alignment between all the parties. It makes sure that everybody's on the same page with everything. This FinCEN real estate reporting is the same thing. So set expectations, especially if your buyer is one of these entities and you know they're going to have to report, let them know. Contact when you're talking to your sellers about a listing, just let them know, hey, there's this new thing. If an offer comes in on a cash buyer who's an entity, we might have to do this reporting. Okay, and there may be fees associated with that. Now, typically a buyer is going to be paying these fees. That's what the UAR has said, and actually that's what ULTA, the Utah Land Title Association, has said. This is a buyer fee because the buyer triggers the reporting, right? But on this, as a real estate agent, again, one of the things you should not do is advise their clients to not purchase using their entity. That's a decision between a buyer and their attorney, not a buyer and their real estate agent or broker, right? So this is one, if you have a family trust, this rule is kind of easy to get around, right? Okay, if you are going to buy, if you have a family trust, but you choose to buy the property as an individual, well, then FinCEN, it doesn't trigger because the entity is not the buyer. Does that mean you should go to everybody with a family trust who wants to buy a property and say, hey, just buy this as an individual? That's not your call, and you shouldn't be making that decision. Okay, it's for them and their attorneys. You can tell them, hey, when a family trust purchases a property with cash, there's this additional report that's due. Let them make the decision. You don't do it for them. Okay, don't give them tax advice. This is what the UAR, this is their communication here. This came out a couple of weeks ago, and the number one thing it says is talk to your title company. Okay, so again, because we're the reporting people, the escrow officer is, yeah, we need to do this. It goes through the same thing. So hopefully you read this. And it also talks about on a split closing, who should do the reporting. Now, we're not going to see a lot of split closings on these transactions unless the buyer is getting some sort of hard money loan and they want to close at another title company. Typically with a cash deal, everybody closes at the same place. But in the unlikely event there is a split closing, it's the buyer side title company who should do the reporting. Okay, the implication of that is, hey, if that's true, then your seller is going to be giving their private personal information over to a title company they're not contracted with. And although that's not an ideal situation, that's the situation that we're in because the reporting is required. We're going to rely on the buyer side title company to do that. Now, look at what it says as far as Fincen fees. You should expect to see fees of $300 to $400 for additional reporting. It might get up to that level again, but I think most title companies are just passing through the $120 fee for now. Yeah, Eric, you had a question, I think.
Hey, can you go back a page and just go down? I like the REPSI implications down at the bottom
Yeah,
there. So in section 3.1, where it defines, I believe that's the section that defines closing. Some of the
yeah,
conditions for closing to have occurred is that the buyer and seller have to have delivered to each other or to the escrow closing office all documents required by the REPSI, by the lender, by the title insurance and escrow closing office. And now by definition of law, this is one of those documents required by the title insurance or escrow closing office. So closing hasn't technically occurred until this is done. So it's another good reason, regardless of which title company you use and their policies. Tucker's saying their policy, and they anticipate most title companies will be to not do the closing or recording or whatever until this is done. But technically, from a legal standpoint or from a contractual standpoint, at least, it won't be closed. And again, closing is all defined in the contract, right? So settlement, we've got a settlement deadline. Closing has to take place within 4 days of that. But like Tucker said, if somebody's got their money, oh, we'll get to that later. What's the impetus for them to do that? I mean, there's a headache here potentially if we're not on top of this, and it's part of the contract as well. Sorry, Tucker, I just
yeah.
wanted to make sure we didn't miss that little aspect.
No, that's a great aspect and a great implication there, Eric. That's perfect. That's perfect. Okay, so how do we help real estate agents and brokers with this? The first thing that you can do is take a 1 hour course, the e-class with Backman Title. So congratulations, you've already completed number one. Okay, there's that guide for agents on that Fincen Real Estate Reporting website. We'll have this handout for everybody. I put some Fincen definitions and things like that in the handout in the chat. After we bank your hours, Christine will be able to email that to you as well. So you'll just have that PDF and how to answer questions. If the buyer, everything is negotiable in the contract, right? So I went to Backman's legal counsel. I went to Brian. I said, "Hey, what if the buyer puts in the contract that they want the seller to pay for the FinCEN fee?" He said, well, if that's the case, then they should give us instructions. And he actually gave us some sample language, right? Um, so if you wanted to put this on a rep sheet, I don't think it's a bad idea to just talk about who's going to pay the fee and who's responsible for it. This is modeled almost like the fees when it talks about HOA dues. You could use something like that. But again, before you add anything to the contract or do your own addendum, talk to Eric. You talk to your broker before you do anything like this. This is just some sample language that might work. Our guide for buyers is here. Okay. We'll have some of the same handouts that we can give to a buyer. Hey, why is this reporting necessary? That FinCEN real estate report, I mean, they can watch a 3-minute video and understand why they're required to report. Okay, as we understand, or as we get word that this is a FinCEN reportable transaction, our escrow team is going to send an email to the buyers and say, hey, you're about to get a note from a third-party provider. And this is who the third-party provider is, and this is why and how this reporting takes place. Now, these last 3 pages, that's a really long email. How many of you would actually read the full email if you got it from a title company that you hadn't worked with before? So what we ended up doing is there's a short version for people who have short attention spans. It basically says the same thing. And for those that don't do email, here's a text version of language that we'll have for our escrow officers and for you. Hey, if this is an all-cash transaction, there's a federal law that requires a report. You're going to get a secure email. It takes about 5 minutes. If you don't do this step, closing can't happen. So do it quickly, right? So there's all these different things. For sellers, it's the same thing. There's that guide for sellers about FinCEN. Why do I have to do this report and why is it required? There's a video for that, right? And there's marketing handouts and flowcharts. They're also going to get the same type of email from us at Backman. Each title company is going to handle this a little bit differently. This is how we're handling it, right? The sellers will get a thing saying, "Hey, you're about to receive this notice, or you get this invitation to Fincen from our third party reporting fee." I said third party. That's really funny. I'm never going to live that down. It's also recorded, so that's wonderful, Eric. Can you just take that out of context whenever you need to make fun of me, and it'll just say third party? That'd be great. Yeah. Now I've
Sorry,
lost my train
I'm
of thought.
writing a letter to our attorney right now to see if he's on the forms committee for the Utah Association. So either I want to know if a form is being developed so that we're not using your language, because our law says we can't make up our own language, but we can use language prepared by an attorney. So I'm asking him if there's any discussion to add this language to our standard purchase contract, because it's going to be a player in every transaction.
Yeah, potentially it could be.
Yeah, or
Um,
if we want to develop our own language, as you know, have our attorney develop it, and so that we have
before
something
you
we can go
send
to.
before you send that, give me 5 more minutes because there's a few other things that might be on that should be on that form,
Okay.
right? Here's the short version of that seller email and the text version, right? We're going to do this pretty quickly. Eric brought this up already, but again, on the UAR form, unless we've delivered everything as a buyer and seller to the title company, closing cannot happen. So even though Fincen is not explicitly named in the contract, it's there by implication now. That's what we went over. So the Utah Land Title Association, this is their flow chart, their recommended solution. If it's a split, then the buyer's title company will do the report. Okay, you use your service, you get the clear to close from the reporting agency. They're going to file the report by the deadline, and the fee is charged to the buyer. Again, all fees are negotiable, but again, most of our communication from the UAR and the ULTA is that the buyer will pay the fee. So here's our risk. So these are things that are not in the contract necessarily, and things that you don't want to decide as a real estate agent. Who decides the reporting is required? Well, according to FinCEN, it's the title company. It's not the agent. It's not the seller. It's not the buyer who says, "But I don't think I should have to do this." The buck stops with the title company. Okay, who's going to handle the reporting? Usually it's the buyer side. Okay. When the buyer side handles the transaction, the seller has to turn over their personal information to the buyer side title company, or at least their reporting agency. That's something that happens. Okay. Don't assume that someone is going to handle it though, unless your buyers and sellers have completed the form. It shouldn't be assumed. Okay, reporting must be completed before closing. Yeah, don't wait until the day of closing or day before. Don't do that. Get your title company information. At Backman, our system will set up a reminder for the escrow officer not only to send the reporting questionnaire, the reporting link to buyers and sellers. It goes in 3 days after to say, "Hey, has the report been completed or not?" And if not, then your escrow officer or their assistant's going to start calling buyers and sellers. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Uh, just anticipating scenarios. Let's say that we encourage our clients to enter this in early. We're well prepared. We get it done in the first week or two, and then the deal falls apart at the appraisal finance deadline a week before closing. Is there any concerns that we have, or how do we allay those concerns for our sellers or whoever now that they've entered all their personal information in and the deal is dead?
So the reporting doesn't happen to FinCEN until the transaction closes, and the fees aren't charged to a buyer or seller until the transaction closes. So the information is going to be held by that third party reporting company, but it won't be reported unless there is a closing. Now, the mere fact that they have the information it's a concern and should be a concern for folks, but I'm not sure how else we get around that. One of the questions that I hope the forms company or the forms committee will talk about is what happens if a party refuses to sign. And in reality, it's what happens if the seller refuses to sign, because there's no contract deadline directly tying to FinCEN. With almost everything else, it's by the due diligence deadline or by the disclosure or the financing and appraisal deadline. I would love to see if they're going to do a form, some sort of contract deadline that's tied to performance and possibly tied to earnest money and earnest money receipt. because it's not on the contract yet. This create disputes among the buyer and seller regarding earnest money and regarding performance? A seller says, "Hey, I've completed with the contract," and the buyer side says, "Yeah, but you didn't do your FinCEN report." And the seller says, "The contract doesn't say FinCEN." Again, it's that thing that hasn't been tested yet. Well, the title company requires it, therefore it's in the contract. Mm, I I think it's still a gray area until somebody proves it out in court. That's why I'm in favor of doing a separate form. Question from Joseph: How much money are the title companies going to charge the buyer and seller at Backman, where it's a pass-through fee? So it's $120 for the buy, and that includes the buyer and seller report. It's not $120 for each of them. Who pays the fees? ULTA and UAR says this is a buyer fee. Would it be better for that to be on the contract? I think it would be, but I don't get to make the contract. All right, here's our contract language. We already looked at this. This is also about risk mitigation and risk management. Your buyers and sellers should know, hey, I'm going to have to give up my contact information to a title company, and maybe not their social security numbers and the social security numbers for all their kids, but their contact information is the one thing that we need to get the report started. Like I mentioned before, we don't want their kids' social security numbers in our system. That's why we're using the third-party reporting service. Okay. People should be worried about getting unexpected emails and clicking on bad links. Okay, especially in a real estate transaction, or when they're doing a loan or getting any sort of financing. So it's important that your buyers and sellers know this is the email that you're going to get, and this is where the email is coming from, and this is how we know it's safe, right? That's something that should be there. Agents, again, you don't give legal advice. You don't get to determine what the compliance is. The title company has to take that on. And you should not advise people about how to fill out their contract, whether or not they should be the buyer individually or their entity. That's a question between them and their attorney. What if the risk of purchasing a property in your own name and having it in your own name is greater than the risk, or is less than the risk of not doing a FinCEN report? That's something that they should talk about with their attorney. So here's the questions that aren't on the REPC yet, or aren't on an addendum yet, which I hope will be. Who's doing the reporting? How much does it cost? Who's paying for the report? It's required before closing, but it's not tied to a specific deadline. Should it be? What are the implications if either party fails to file? And should this FinCEN reporting tie to earnest money reimbursement? Like if the FinCEN report isn't done by the seller, but it's 2 weeks after financing and appraisal, should the buyer get their earnest money back? Right, those are questions that haven't been answered yet, Eric. I think you were on the right track in typing the email to the attorney.
I made a list of those things. Should I hit send?
Yeah, I think you should. Yep. Here's our goals. Our common goals. Everyone wants the transaction to be protected. None of us get paid unless these transactions close. Like none of us want to be to inhibit that, right? Again, what we're trying to do is just align everybody's expectations and align everyone's instructions. And that's what escrow is really about, is creating that alignment with instructions from you guys in the real estate industry. Our common goal is real estate agents. You don't want to delay closing. You don't want your clients to be confused. You don't want them coming to closing and having a bad experience because they're trying to remember their email password to log in on someone else's laptop to get in and do the report. You don't want to do that in settlement. You want to protect your client relationships as well, because there are going to be people who are mad about having to report. We just can't get around that. It's just going to happen. Right? But you don't have to be the enemy. The title company doesn't have the enemy. Let's all hate the federal government together. Right? I think that's one of those things that we can do. Some of you are already like, yeah, some of you are like, I already hate him. This is perfect. Well, this is another thing to add to your list, right? Like, yeah, anyway, I'll just leave that there. We want these transactions reported early. We want the FinCEN report done. One, it's a requirement on our title commitment now. And two, we don't want to have a $1,400 fine. We also love it when these fees are disclosed up front. The buyer should know that there's going to be $120 charged to them, right? Or whatever the title company charges. Okay, we don't want to do a last minute compliance scramble either. So the big picture items on this is that it's a federal mandatory pre-closing, non-negotiable reporting that has to happen by buyers and the sellers. As an agent, flag it early. You set expectations about what the report is and how much it's going to cost. Open your escrow completely. When you do that, the title company is going to want contact information for all the parties, names, email addresses, and phone numbers at the very least. And then just avoid those last minute surprises if you can. So these are questions that you can discuss with Eric, okay, with your broker. Does your brokerage have individual contract guidance? It sounds like they do and they will. Okay, how does your brokerage handle compliance timing? Is there going to be a rule at your brokerage that says, hey, if you're going to do a transaction, we need Fincen tied to a performance deadline? Is it going to be seller disclosures, diligence, or financing and appraisal? That's something for you and your brokerage to talk about. Okay, and again, what are the implications if someone refuses to cooperate in filing the report? Okay, is this a performance issue? Is this something we can do? And then it's always just a good idea whenever there are fees to figure out who's going to pay for those fees. Okay, folks, believe it or not, that is our last little bit on here. Does anyone have any questions as we wrap this up? I know it's a lot to digest in a couple of minutes and 40 minutes, but let's see if there's any questions from the group.
Tucker,
Yeah.
it's Rebecca Openshaw. Hey, I just had a question. You guys are going to be sending out the emails, texts, whatever. How do you decide which one to send out? Do you say, okay, I'm going to send out the long email, or do you ask us which one to send, or?
We're probably going to ask you, like, will this person read their email? Because that's the thing. What's the saying? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
We're gonna ask and say, hey, there's this, and it might depend on the type of person your seller is, right? You might have a husband or a wife who will read the whole thing, but their spouse will only read that one paragraph text, and that's the extent that they're going to do, right?
Okay.
So it's probably going to be you. I mean, we're probably just going to ask you. On our system, if you're set up through our portal, you're going to get the long email no matter what, and then the follow-up might be the short text.
Okay, and then will
the
we be
shorter email.
notified when the parties have filled out their forms? So we'll be in the loop to say, hey, you guys need to do this if we haven't received notice from you guys?
Yeah, I think your escrow officer, within 3 days of sending the invitation to the parties, they're going to have, in our system, it's a red task. It turns red, and they're probably going to be calling the buyers and sellers first. And if they're not getting any response, they're going to be on the phone with you. Because at Backman, there's two things that are tied to this. One, there's no settlement unless the FinCEN report is done.
Right.
And the second thing is there's no commission paid on any file where there's not a FinCEN report done. So is it tied to performance by our escrow officers? Yeah, because we're not making $1,394 per transaction. Wouldn't it be great if we were though? Man, imagine.
And then I have one last question, if I may.
Of course, yeah.
On the proof of funds, I saw that form quickly, but they don't need a bank statement. They just need where the funds are coming from and the account number, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, great question.
Tucker, I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned that real estate agents shouldn't be filling out this form, but I have scenarios where I wear a lot of hats. I am the successor trustee to a trust of my parents. And then I am also going to be the agent that sells the place. And I am also a beneficiary. And in my family, I am also the court jester. I am also the family therapist. And to some, I am the devil for sure. And so, what is my, if I'm an agent and I can't fill that form out, because I am also a beneficiary of the trust. And so
what he's saying there, can I answer this, Tucker?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
What he's saying there is if your only role in this is as an agent, then you shouldn't be filling this form out for your clients. But if you are the principal in the transaction and it directly concerns you, then you have to fill it out. So there's no rule that says as an agent, you cannot do this for yourself. What he's suggesting is even though there's a box there to check that you're the agent, don't ever be the agent that helps your clients out by doing it for them, right? If you're one of the
Yeah, that's exactly
principals,
right.
fantastic, fill it out because it applies to you. If you're a realtor just trying to be helpful, take a step back and stay in your lane. This isn't real estate world. Is that fair, Tucker?
Yeah, I think that's the exact right answer, Eric. Thank you. And that's a great question, guys. That's a very good question.
Some
Okay,
agents do try to be super helpful, but they go outside of their lane and they're out. My favorite example, I used to teach this in real estate school, is the person that's wondering where the farm boundaries are. And so the realtor being super helpful says, you know what, I learned this in real estate school. And if I pace this many paces out in the field, this should be the corner of your property. And it's just silly, right? And yet that's what we taught in real estate school in meets and bounds. And we all know that no, we stay in our lane and we say you should get a surveyor to verify that for you. But that isn't what we do. Or how much money can I expect to save in taxes? Well, you should probably talk to your CPA. That isn't what we do. It's that same vein of thought where if they say, hey, can you help me fill this out? We say, you know what? I can't help you fill that out. I'm your real estate agent. I do the real estate. This is something that, you know, if you have questions on whether you should do it, you can ask an attorney. Like if you are a drug lord and you're using this to funnel money, then talk to somebody else and get advice from them. But I'm not the advisor on that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice, everybody. More questions from the group, and then we'll go through who's registered on our sheet, make sure everybody's there. Main thing is the buyer is the one that triggers the report, not the seller. So if the buyer doesn't trigger the report, you don't have to worry about any of this. If it's not a cash transaction, you don't have to worry about it. If it's not residential, you don't have to worry about it. If it's uh, getting a traditional loan from a traditional lender, you don't have to worry about it. It's those other three things from a buyer, an entity, not getting a loan, and used for residential. Those are the three things that we have to worry about.
So back again to the trust, if there's a trust and there's beneficiaries, but they're the seller, they don't need to worry about this report if they're
The seller might have to report that, yeah, who the beneficiaries of their trust are. They don't have to say where the money's going, that it's a source of funds, not a destination of funds reporting. But yeah, you will likely have to report the beneficiary information on the seller side when this report is triggered as well.
So even though
Think
the
about
buyer
those.
triggers it, Drew, even though the buyer triggers it, if the buyer triggers it, then it could affect the sellers.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. I'm
All
going
right,
to
should
go
I
through.
end the recording here? Is this a good place to end it?
Yeah, I think that's a great place, Eric. Thanks, everybody. Don't hang up yet. Let's make sure you're all